bios for myself and Ed Citzler. Ed is the sustainability policy lead for USACE headquarters. I'm a sustainability implementation lead or sustainability SME. We together worked on the SIG with several of the teammates, a few of which are on the line as far as incorporating comments and latest changes. So feel free to reach out to us if you have questions about the SIG or anything you hear in the presentation. Here's a brief agenda. We'll be talking about the overview and applicability for the implementation guide. We're largely Army. We'll be talking about LEED specifically in some areas today, but know that we are talking about the greater sustainability goals. Number 2, programming and planning phase, design phase, construction phase. We'll be talking about some specifics from the SIG that we want to pull out and make sure you all have a chance to hear. We'll be talking about some of the attachments to the SIG and additional resources that you can find before leading into a Q&A. So we're going to try and get through this relatively quickly so we can have a good opportunity for questions from the field. First off, these are the 3 big links that you'll want to know and want to reference later. The ECB 2023-2 is the announcement for the SIG. The SIG is then posted to the Mercy site, and of course we'll provide these links on the Mercy site after the fact. And the UFC specifically talking about high performance and sustainable building requirements, where most of this information is derived from. So the SIG overview and applicability, wanted to call out the table in the UFC specifically of which projects are required to complete a high performance sustainable building record card for guiding principles, compliance tracking and reporting, and the additional requirement of third-party certification. So that's LEED Silver for Army. For the second bullet there's 3 options really of if the project meets any of those 3 criteria, they're therefore required to perform the high performance sustainable building, typically 10,000 gross square feet and greater, or 3 million or greater. So we've got a little asterisk there next to the 10,000. Be on the lookout for a change in that criteria in the coming days, weeks, or months, potentially going to raise that threshold to about 25,000 gross square feet, and potentially change to the dollar amount threshold too. I think it's in the neighborhood of 5 million. But that third bullet, really talking about third-party certification, so LEED Silver, this is a mandatory requirement. So if those projects meet those thresholds, you have to do it. This has been this way for, I don't know, the last decade or so. So if you have any questions about applicability, this is a good reference to go look at in the UFC table 1-1. The programming and planning phase, in the SIG, we've called out some specific sample RFP language. So we're talking about specs, commissioning, roles and responsibilities, reporting requirements, and the third-party certification requirements. What we want you to know is that LEED project registration, please invite Army LEED at usace.army.mil to all registered projects. What that does is gives us some visibility at the headquarters level to track these projects and see how they're coming along, and also step in when we can to help achieve some credits if we need to. We ask that those projects are registered prior to 15% design, and you must have a LEED AP or a guiding principles compliance professional attached to those projects. The next 3 bullets are talking about specific specs. 01-3316 design data. That's your opportunity to add sustainability information to the design analysis. Spec 01-3329, that's where we require the LEED and high performance sustainable building scorecards and record cards to be attached. You can also require regular sustainability meetings during design and construction. That would be assigned by the sustainability SME. And then spec 019100.15 would be the total building commissioning. So that's where you can add the commissioning plan as an attachment to make sure those goals are being met as well. And the last bullet here is parametric design report system, the PDRS. It's a link through the Mercy page. Requires those scorecards and record cards as part of the Code 2 and PDRS system. All right, the design phase. So the integrated project delivery, LEED specifically has a credit for this called the integrative process credit. Wanted you all to know that it really starts at day one. It starts at essentially the Code 2 or the project authorization. So get your team members assigned and on board early in order to achieve that credit. So energy modeling and LCCA is also mentioned in the SIG. So referring to the specific ER on how to create the whole building ER model, or excuse me, the energy model, and talking about the LCCA and when it's applicable and not. And one of the notes there is looking for alternative compliance methods. So you might be able to use LEED version 4.1 credit for some of those credits. And that last bullet is really talking about more of those LEED interpretations and addenda for alternative compliance paths. You can even change which energy model baselines you're referencing or running your models against. So that list is regularly updated. We're going to try and build a database of knowing which projects are typically able to achieve certain addenda or certain interpretations and provide you with that information as we build our database of knowledge here. So the last phase, construction phase. So we really call out roles and responsibilities. They're not necessarily requirements. They're really more suggestions of who's charged with fulfilling which particular role and responsibility along a sustainable project. So we also mentioned the S-code submittals. We recommend that the S-codes are all reviewed by the district sustainability SME, not necessarily just at the field level or the QA level. They should be able to go to the district SME. The construction sustainability e-notebook. This is one thing that we've seen is not being regularly reviewed across all projects. We recommend that it goes to the sustainability SME for compliance and regular updates. The third party, or in our case, Army's case, LEED online documentation should be owned by USACE, typically registered by the PM. Sometimes we're seeing that projects are getting registered really late or even at the contractor stage of construction. We're asking you not to do that. 15% design, this thing should already be registered and permissions granted to the contractor during construction phase. The LEED construction review should be submitted at substantial completion. And I would recommend that the contractor should pay for appeals of credits to achieve LEED requirements if they fall short. So their contract should typically say they're required to meet LEED Silver by the end of the project. So if they fall short for some reason during construction, they should try to appeal for a few more of those credits to achieve that requirement. And lastly, the USACE PM to ensure the LEED Silver certification rating, including the number of credits achieved, is entered into P2. Again, that helps on our documentation level at headquarters, but really making sure we're complying with the right regulations here through the P2 reports. So attachments to the SIG, I think there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 or so. The first one being the P2 sustainability reporting. So there is a new ECB about to be published probably in the next month or so with guidance for that P2 reporting that I was just mentioning. We also have LEED process guidance and point-by-point guidance. So we're trying to really have another place of identifying which credits are really being handled by which person that we recommend. We have checklists for success. So if you're new to a sustainability SME role, you may be able to use those to help you ensure that you're following the recommended recommendations that we're talking about today about what to do and when to do it. Training. So USGBC provides free training for LEED to USACE personnel. It's part of our subscription or membership benefit that we get from them. Prospect 244, Sustainable Military Building Design and Construction, is led by the proponent Ed on this call. So that's really for all team members. Don't think of that as just being a sustainability SME. That's for all disciplines. All people who touch a sustainable project can benefit from that course and the USACE Sustainability webinar series that you're literally sitting at. So lastly, we have an attachment for the waiver process, a LEED silver waiver. They should be submitted early, typically by 35% design. You should know if you're going to fall short of meeting your 50 required credits or not. You should not wait until after the project is complete to submit a waiver. By then, it may be way too late to actually earn a few more credits that we can help you find potentially. And potential waiver requests may be reviewed by myself or Ed at headquarters prior to being submitted to the ASA. Again, we can help you wordsmith that a bit, or potentially look into credits that might be able to be salvaged. And waivers must explain that all avenues for compliance were attempted. So that last point there is lack of funds is typically not an acceptable cause for not achieving LEED Silver per the ASA's office. So we hear that a lot, and we're here to tell you that that doesn't necessarily fly. All right, those links and references again. Here we have a few more links and things, and you'll see this in the slide deck. So the whole building design guide, Army Corps of Engineers page is for the criteria. It's open to the public. That's really where the UFCs and UFGSs reside, along with the ECBs. The Mercy sustainability site actually contains the SIG, but has other guidance, implementation guides, case studies, and webinars will be posted there. And in progress, Ed and I are working on a LEED specific portion and a decarbonization electrification portion of that. So we're going to try and build in some specific information to those sustainability topics, along with project trackers, credit by credit guidance, and things like that. The knowledge management portal, we mentioned the ACOP, the architecture community of practice, but really all the other disciplines should begin to see specific info on how they relate to sustainability and LEED. And the last link there is the Teams channel. This is really meant for a Q&A or a quick question opportunity for you all to ask questions and hopefully provide some feedback to other SMEs around the Corps. All right, so going through that relatively quickly, now we can open it up for Q&A and discussion. Does anyone have a question?
Are you looking for questions in the chat, or?
Yeah, there's a few questions in the chat.
Either way, yeah, I'll ask Billy or Ed to moderate the chat. But Brandon, I saw your hand up. Why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, hey, it's also in the chat, but I saw the registration of the project in LEED Online would be prior to the 15% for the project, and I was curious why we would not wait until the Code 6 is received, because when we have the Code 2, those projects have a risk of falling out of the program due to funding or just shifting projects around, versus once we get a Code 6, that's, hey, proceed to full design, and that means the project's much more likely to stay in the program, and seems like an appropriate point to go ahead and register at that point. Just curious about that.
Tracking, you're not wrong. So we've had this discussion. Code 2 essentially gets you to 35%. By that time, you would potentially know if this is going to be applicable for LEED or not. By full design, you're absolutely right. we're not afraid of projects falling out of the program because chances are they're going to stay in the lead requirement if they ever come back off the shelf. So it is our way to get the project teams on early, get after those integrated design points, where if you wait too long, you're going to miss out on the opportunities like that. So that's why we recommend, register early and often.
Yeah. The one thing that
Thanks.
I will add, and pardon my voice, I'm losing my voice, but this is Ed Citzler. The other thing that I would add is you will be utilizing a lead scorecard for going past the code 2 analysis. So there is a point of you're going to be utilizing the intellectual property. If we register early, we can start tracking whether or not it falls into that. That you do need to be a high performance sustainable building. You will have third-party certification through LEED, and we can utilize their information. So that's kind of why we pushed it earlier. I know some people kind of wait till the very last moment at 95%, and I think that's a bad case. But there is an argument for that 35%, but we're recommending it be done much earlier so that it can be tracked and all the information be known. Over.
And if I can just add to what Ed was saying, this is Billy Tyndall. Operationally and practically, sustainability needs to occur during the programmatic or parametric design phase earlier than we're accustomed to. And to Ed's point, it's like, gee, we can wait, we can do this anytime. That's a process error, and it has limited our performance in the past. This is a mission requirement. It's not just somebody's crazy idea. Ed and Ryan didn't dream this up. This is a mission requirement from the Secretary of the Army. So this needs to be done early. Integrated design means early, at the earliest phases. And for that to be operationalized in how we deliver projects, that has to be done at the earliest possible phase. Waiting to 35%, I believe, is a major mistake.
Okay, I'll read some of the questions that are on the chat. One of them is, should the Army lead at usace.army.mil be added to all lead online projects or only MilCon ones, MCA? It should be added to all of them. It's pretty much notifying us that the project is registered and helps with the tracking both in P2 and on the USGBC side. We hit Brandon's question. Do we want to say UFC 1-200-02 also applies to civil works buildings per the 2014 memo? That is correct. It does apply to that due to the 2014 memo. We are looking at possibly reissuing that memo, but the memo does still stand. So civil works buildings do need to meet that, and that is vertical construction for civil works specifically. Is the 01-3329 specification still required if the high performance sustainable building checklist and TPC is not required? The tailoring instructions echo the table 1-1 threshold to say to use the spec if one of the thresholds are met, but I wanted to confirm. Currently, for the Army and Navy, it's not required. The 01-3329 specification is not required. I am currently researching that, and we'll be discussing that tomorrow with the Navy and Air Force counterparts on why the Army is not requiring the high performance sustainable building checklist. The reason that I say that is all of our buildings need to meet guiding principles. Third-party certification and LEED Silver is for certain thresholds. And so we need to be able to validate that we are meeting those guiding principles for all of our facilities, and we are meeting the requirements of the law. How do electrification requirements meet LCCA? I think this is referring to the new electrification requirements. I believe DoD policy may have come out today. I'm still researching that, but the signature looks legit, and we will have an electrification policy. And what that means is we are going to reduce scope 1 emissions on decarbonization by not utilizing gas-fired equipment for, it's like 4 things. It's conditioning of the space, laundry, uh, stoves, and one other thing, which is just evading my mind at the moment. But yes, you will probably see an ECB very soon due to that DoD policy on electrification coming out. And that is also related to the Executive Order 14057, which we are awaiting multiple policies to come out from both DoD and Army policies to enact those into the UFCs. So you will see some changes probably very quickly.
Okay, hey, this
Mhm.
is Sven. I was the one who actually put that question in because it's like, this astounds me as a mechanical engineer because, you know, I'm looking at electrification and across the nation, it's like there's a good percentage of our power is coming from fossil fuel generated power. So your net production is probably, by the time you get to your final facility, maybe 35, 45% efficiency, probably no better than that. So how are we decarbonizing if we're like eliminating the use of a, let's say a 95% efficient fossil fuel fired boiler for heating? If we're going to electricity, and again, we got COPs on heat pumps, but it's just like from a thermodynamic point of view, it's like blowing my mind away how we have these mandates to go electrification when a lot of our electrification is coming from fossil fuel. Anyone can respond to that?
Yes, sure. I'll go ahead and respond to that. So you are correct. Depending upon the state makeup of the grid and how clean the grid is, there is possibility that while electrifying, we will be creating issues in certain locations in certain states, let's say, that the grid is not clean. The intent is that as states are providing more solar and wind power in these locations, the grid will continue to be cleaner and cleaner. So this is the concept of we're going to be ready for a clean grid by electrifying early. Now, I am not the decision maker, I will say on that. And this is information from the executive order and the office of the president that has gone through the White House CEQ. The reason we didn't immediately enact this is we do need policy. We do need policy to cover us and make sure that the idea is there. Now, I can give you other thoughts, and I don't want to get too far into this because we will have a webinar series specifically on this coming up, and I know there's probably people holding their tongues because they have ideas too. So what I would say is hold that question again if you want even more information. But what I would say is, yes, I understand it's going to blow some people's minds, and I'm not even starting about climate zone 7 and 8. That's a whole nother discussion. But what I will say is we will have more information in the ECB coming out, and this is not the decision. This is not a decision that will be made at headquarters USACE or USACE in general. This will be a DoD decision that's made and an Army policy that will feed into what we are required to do. And I have every belief that our engineers can find good solutions with this electrification, but you will run into times where if you just look at it from a time stamp of right now, it may not make sense, but that is what the policy is going to be.
Okay, yeah, thanks for that.
Mhm.
I think what's kind of be immediate to me though, and to my staff would be like, how do we do LCCA? Because you've kind of, you know, this policy is blowing it out of the water, right? Because we are supposed to do LCCA. We're supposed to figure out what's most life cycle cost effective. And then here's this policy coming out and says, well, we'll just do electrification.
Correct.
So
what I would say is
how do you
solution.
reconcile that?
Right. And I believe that we haven't gotten to the criteria point where we have the paragraph written. But what I will say is LCCA will still be utilized, but there are certain decisions that will be pre-made. There are certain types of equipment that will not be allowed within the LCCA. And that way we meet the clauses in, what is it, Title 10 CFR 433 and 436. We'll meet those requirements, but we will just limit the selection that goes into that. And again, I've got some other questions that I want to hit, but that is a good discussion. And if you want to talk a little bit, there's a couple other people that I know want to chime in on this, and this is going to be a long conversations. But what I would say is, yes, we're thinking about these things. We're contemplating that, and we haven't put out the guidance yet in a UFC. Let's just say that.
Hey, Billy, did you have something to add or a question?
Yeah, just one thing that might clarify what Ed was saying. There's what we call scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. And what Sven's talking about is the mix of scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. Scope 1 emissions are local sources, and scope 2 emissions are sources that come remotely or from another organization. For instance, grid source is a scope 2 emission. And the intent of the policy is for the Army to actively minimize scope 1 emissions. And scope 1 emissions come from fossil fuel burning on-site equipment. So whether or not, and to Ed's point, and to also Sven's point, whether or not that meets an ideal balance right now, given that we can't control scope 2 emissions, but nationwide scope 2 emissions are in the process of being reduced. Policy here is electrifying reduces the scope 1 emissions.
Thank you, Billy. That's a good clarification. Okay. Here's a question. Are alternates to LEED acceptable? The answer is you must read UFC 1-200-02 because for Army, the answer is no. Army policy dictates we're going to go with LEED silver. But that does not mean that all of your projects are going to be Army specific projects. So that's why I'm going to leave it open and say and refer to UFC 1-200-02. So we can spend whatever funds we need to achieve LEED silver. We can usually buy points. If you're talking about what is it, energy conservation credits? No, they are not allowed by law. So we are not allowed to specifically buy those credits. And I probably didn't answer that fully. So Michael, Colin, if you could send me an email and we can get into that a little bit deeper about buying points, I'll definitely have a conversation with you.
Okay.
Is there any CE class offered for maintaining LEED credentials? Is that a Corps of Engineers class? Is that what I mean by CE? I'll assume that you mean Corps of Engineers. While 244 does not provide health, safety, and welfare or sustainability credits, I'm going to be looking into that. But what I would say is typically where I would look for maintaining LEED credentials is either through LEED. You can get training through LEED, or I use Ron Blank and Associates which is free, and they have a special green site. So typically that helps out with all your credentialing for sustainability. Where am I? How is USACE sharing this guidance and tools with the AE? AEs can utilize this document, and this is on a public site. So there was a site that showed that, and you can absolutely share the link with the AE on our processes. This is a public document. How does removing carbon from the atmosphere play into decarbonization? Carbon less of an issue in the future. So I hit on that a little bit about decarbonization. I will say that we will have another webinar, but I would just say let's wait on that further discussion because it could be a pretty long discussion. Can we get a copy of the slides? Yes. I'll go to Billy after I answer this one. Can we get a copy of the slides? Yes, they will be posted. And I believe that I think I provided the link. You need to give me approximately a week to post them. Also, to the YouTube site. It'll probably take a week for the webinar to be posted to that YouTube location. Go ahead, Billy.
Yeah, I think a short version of Brian's, to answer Brian's question, is it's not removing carbon from the atmosphere, it's reducing the amount of additional carbon that our buildings and operations add to the atmosphere. So that's how I understand decarbonization. Embodied carbon is the carbon that is added to the atmosphere, free CO2 in the atmosphere from processing quicklime into Portland cement and forging reinforcing steel, and the transportation energy to do that. And then operational carbon is the carbon dioxide that is emitted from the power demands of the operation. So we're not trying to pull carbon out of the atmosphere, which is kind of a cool science fiction idea, and I wish we could do that at scale, but we're trying to dramatically, substantially limit the amount of additional carbon that our buildings and operations put into the atmosphere over.
Good. Yeah, Billy, I completely agree with you. Carbon capture. I miss that was about carbon capture. I will say this, Erdict and Searle are researching carbon capture, but we do not believe that is ready for rollout. I'm not sure if we're going to have that anytime soon into our specifications or criteria, is what I would say. They're looking into it, but like you said, it's out there. I mean, it's pretty wild what they're coming up with on the science fiction. Not quite science fiction, but I like that idea. It's almost science fiction. Yeah. Okay. I came in late, but I'm getting that all projects need to be at least LEED silver. That is correct for Army projects over 10,000 square feet. Natural gas is superior for cooking, impacts cafeterias and kitchens. Has this been approved? I would say that you're going to see the ECB come out soon, and you'll be seeing the criteria soon. But I don't believe that we will be in a debate on whether or not we're going to be doing electrification, is what I would say. Will domestic electric grids support the electrification mandates? That's a great question. I can't say for sure. We have people researching that and looking into that, and we will probably be putting a large load on that, on the electrical grids in a lot of locations. In cases where USACE is not the DOR, such as on design build projects or AE design projects, is it ever appropriate for USACE to have the DOR fund and register the project in LEED online? That's a good question. That typically is some districts utilize that tactic. That is not a best case scenario. We're trying to move away from that, but we do know that a lot of districts do have the AE firm register on LEED online. Again, we have less control over that. It's more of a funding issue and an argument. But what I would say is the majority of districts do register the projects themselves and do not put this as a responsibility onto the AE to register the projects. And I am skipping over some statements that are here that I may be missing a question because we had a lot of comments in the chat. But please email me and Ryan, and we will get back to you with more information on this. All right, the thrust of decarbonization seems to, we have a lot of decarbonization questions, seems to have changed from scope 1 to both scope 1 and 3. Is that correct? Yes, but it's, what is the term? Scope 2 ready. We don't have control over scope 2 fully, but the installations are looking at their contracts with outside energy providers to deal with scope 2. Right now, I believe quickly we're going to see criteria for scope 1. We have pilots that are dealing with scope 3, which we'll discuss next Wednesday. And that'll be kind of an interesting step in the right direction into decarbonization. And Dr. Moser will be here to help us with that conversation, and he'll be leading that webinar. I'm getting near the end. Can you speak to how, again, electrification and decarbonization, can you speak to how electrification requirements evaluate use of existing centralized steam heat utilities? There is this, I received the DoD policy less than an hour to 2 hours ago. Even though we've been reviewing the drafts, there is a very specific piece on centralized steam heat utilities that I think is applicable. But again, let's talk about that in a few weeks when we get to our, I think it's in 2 weeks, we'll talk about more on decarbonization, and we'll have a lot of people from both, I believe, not just architects, but the mechanical community of practice and the electrical community of practice will also be able to prepare and chime in on that. And so I'm pretty excited about Mr. Martin discussing that in about 2 weeks.
Hey, Ed,
Mhm.
I could say you could have a whole 1 or 2 hour session on that, just that alone, because, central heating systems are probably the most inefficient systems we have. They're like 100 years old. I've been working at this for years to like decentralize heating plants in the Northwest here at Joint Base Lewis McChord, and we've been successful. And I would offer that most central heating plants at best net efficiency is probably less than 50%. So it's such a good discussion point, and yet there are still many bases that are hanging on to their steam systems and even their hot water systems. Hot water systems are probably a lot more energy efficient because there's less losses due to maintenance. But yeah, I would offer that you could have a 1 or 2 hour session with this, with mechanical engineers just like heavily weighing in, and I think it would probably be one of the most important things we could talk about when it comes to the Department of Defense and reducing energy usage. And
Yes.
it transcends electrification probably.
While I agree with you, that may be a little bit beyond the scope of the sustainability webinar series, but I believe that this DoD policy is fresh off the press. I believe that USACE headquarters, the mechanical COP, the electrical COP, and the architectural COP will all be paying close attention to this and having more discussions and more communication with the districts and the MSCs in the near future. So while we probably will still keep the format of a presentation and then limited amounts of questions afterwards, I do not think that we will shy away from those type of meetings and those communications, probably just in a different format.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I'm gonna toss this back to you, Ryan. Is there any other things or any other questions that I missed, or thoughts
Yeah,
that you have?
Cynthia had a question about applicability. I believe the answer is and, but let's get there. So the question was, looks like for number 2, if it's greater than 10,000 gross square feet and more than 3 million estimated cost, then it would be applicable. Ed, correct me if I'm wrong. That's an and, not an or for the size and the dollar amount.
Are we looking at 1 or 2?
I'm looking at number 2.
Yeah,
You're
so
right. That's comprehensive replacement.
That's
Right.
comprehensive replacement. So, and that has the total
Right.
cost of greater than 3 million. And I will
Right.
tell you this, that the 50%, a lot of projects start out at 49%. I'm not sure why people pick that specific number, but all of these projects start out at 49%. You need to be prepared that when it goes over 50%, you meet all the requirements that entail that, because a lot of people are finding out late in design that they're over 51% replacement cost.
Ed, I'm going to go ahead and ask my question out loud.
Okay.
This is Allison from Baltimore. I'm sorry, but the assumption that I've been making and that I've started to tell other people and what's in the flow chart and the guide and all the things is that what you've got at the top here, the unmentioned thing, is the table 1-1, chapter 2 applies to all building design and construction. Well, it doesn't say building, but all design and construction, meaning the HPSB design content has to be included. The second bullet here is only the tracking checklist. That's it, tracking and reporting. Therefore, I've been including spec 013329 on all projects that are building design and construction that meet the applicability. So is that not the way it needs to be done?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Your intent is correct. The problem is that the criteria, I believe, needs to change. And that's where the conversation will come about with the Sustainable Functional Working Group to correct the Army portion of UFC 1-200-02, which does state what you said. You do not need to include 133, is it 19 or 29? Either one. You do not need to include that spec in Army and Navy projects, but Air Force does require it for specifically the reason you're requiring. So I'm going to try to push us to be more in line with the Air Force at our next SFWG meeting. Does that help? In my opinion,
it sounds like I'm on the right path. It's just not how it's been worded, and that you're kind of edging in that direction. So I will continue doing what I'm doing, I think, but I'll just stop telling other people that they need to do the same thing.
Yes, yeah, that's what I would say. The guide specification, the notes to the specification writers, does not require it for Army. That's what I would say.
Yeah, because what I've been doing is picking through and taking out any mention of HPSB checklist, but leaving in every mention of HPSB design.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. And how do you meet? And I won't go too far into this because again, this is an open discussion, and I do not have resolution for this yet, and I hope to have it very soon. But it shows that the UFC requires one thing, 0133 29, I believe, is the one, since it's up on the screen. It says something else in the notes. So we just need to correct that. Okay.
There was
This is
something
Sheila
else that.
Petrasa.
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Sheila Petrasa. I'm with Searle now, but you guys know I'm Murmury from Kansas City District. But working in construction and also design, one of the things, especially having AE designs, design build projects, and then going into construction, I feel that our, even if we refer our AEs to the UFC, the UFGS specs, they still don't understand what those requirements are. Is there any outreach to the AEs and then also to the contractors? Because there are not as many points usually for construction, but we do always have a challenge. We have a challenge with that. I think Aaron Williams, he can agree with me on that. But we've just outreach to these agencies, I think would be good, or the AEs and the contractors would be helpful. I don't know, SAME, some of those kind of conferences I think would be helpful. I noted that the FMEC conference is in a couple weeks. And then I noted to Nick Ivey that you guys were talking about microgrids during one of our sessions. So we might be touching base with you guys there. So just, I guess my recommendation is we do some outreach to AEs and contractors. And I know this is a new policy or an updated policy, but is there plans for that? Over.
I'm not sure if we have plans for that, but that's a great idea. That's something that I'm gonna think about. and look at if we need to talk about or present to SAME. And in my
That's
mind
where
is,
I'd recommend mostly, and that, you know, and being in Kansas City, we've got, you know, Burns and Mac, Black and Beach, you know, it's a big place for the AEs to come, and they do come to the SAME conferences that they're usually in June. They kind of change around, but that's the place I'd outreach. We don't have enough coordination. I still live in Kansas City, but to me, you know, when I go to SAME meetings, it's like me, some commanders, some former commanders, and like 5 people from USACE. And it's like we should have definitely more representation there. Over.
I think that OSD is reaching out this year for the new policies that are coming out and electrification and decarbonization. But I think there's something that needs to be looked at that you talked about is reaching out to SAME to state, are you aware these are the requirements currently in the UFCs, and highlight what we're currently requiring of LEED Silver and so forth. So maybe there's something there to be said for having that discussion or reaching out to them. My position is what I want to try to do is I want to try to educate our designers, our construction folks, and our PMs on the requirements so that they can be enforced in the contracts that they're put in, which should be all of them. So that's kind of my thought, but there is something to be said for letting them be aware, because there's a lot of expertise in all of those groups, which I think can meet our requirements, but they need to be aware of the requirements. So
right, and you only get so many reviews and doctor checks, and you know I see the doctor checks chain, and I know doctor checks is going to go away. We're going to replace it with something hopefully more fabulous, and but you know, any kind of outreach we can get to make those reviewers' lives easier, because I could only make so many comments. I mean, I would comment on everybody's stuff as being electrical. I'm like, hey, if I see an issue with any sustainability stuff, I've pointed it out. And yeah, I don't know how NWK is doing it right now, but you know, some of the staff has changed, and so there isn't necessarily as much expertise. And with the changes, also keeping up with those. So thank you.
and thank you for that comment. That's a pretty good comment. I see one other question, and it is, any minimum certs for construction folks to have? Do we need to be certified? And I'm thinking of conreps and resident engineers. The answer is, I would say, is no, but you should be educated on sustainability or S submittals if you're reviewing them. Hopefully your district has a sustainability point of contact or a sustainability SME that can help you out with the S submittals. But I would say that there is some education needed, but it's not a required certification for our conreps.
Aaron Williams, did you want to ask your question? Saw your hand go up and down. Okay. I wanted to mention something too. We're undergoing an Army-wide audit currently, which is why Ed and I have a renewed interest in getting all this information out to you all. So be on the lookout for an email that may say we need your help, is how we're trying to phrase that, with digging into some older projects that may or may not have achieved LEED Silver in particular. So that's why we're trying to reissue this guidance and get in front of you all. And we just, Ed and I want you to know that we are here to help you navigate all these complexities and things. And if we don't know the answer, we can help you try to find out. And one last note that someone else kind of alluded to that reminded me, and it wasn't in the presentation, is we hear a lot that the installation says, well, we can't install that, insert whatever here, because that's not what we have. We don't have stockpiles of these old light bulbs or whatever it is, and we can't go to this new system that you're specifying and things like that. And our answer is, that's going to stop. That is going to be coming down from the highest levels that we have a job to do. We have laws to follow of achieving this, sustainability goals. And at some point, buying old light bulbs is no longer going to be the excuse. So you can look to your headquarters proponents for that support if you need it when you start having those conversations and hearing those things. I'll tell you to call Billy Tyndall, but he'll smirk at that here in a second. That's the things that we're starting to hear, and we want to start getting that word out. So, any other questions as we're nearing the end of the hour?
I think I'll answer this one question that just popped up and then kind of recap or try, kind of say the way forward on the sustainability webinar series. So it kind of relates to why we had this specific webinar. This specific webinar gives you information on the Sustainability Implementation Guide, which has a lot of information into it. I would highly recommend, if you're from construction, you read the construction portion, or if you're from design, read that part. And typically I would read all of it, because a lot of different subject matter experts from multiple parts of the U.S. Contributed to that. And I would just say thank you to everybody that has contributed to that. It was not created by me and Ryan alone. It typically was a lot of work by a lot of people. That being said, the UFC 1-200-02 is typically our criteria, and that covers new construction, renovation, and so forth. It is a really great document to show what criteria needs to go into design and be utilized for so that we have a good design for construction. So those two documents, that's kind of what we wanted to discuss here at this webinar, is the SIG, which gives us more information on our Army policies and lead requirements, and then the UFC 1-200-02. What I would say is the webinar series on YouTube, if you look up on YouTube USACE and Sustainability, and go to the right page, because there's multiple on there, and we put the link in this webinar, and you'll see it in every one of our webinars. If you go to that location, you will see the 16 webinars from last year. We are not reproducing those webinars. Those webinars are typically from our Prospect 244 sustainability class. And they go over a large gambit of LCCAs or this or different parts. So I would definitely recommend looking over that list, because there's an hour-long webinar from last year that is great for you to listen to. It's not live and you can't ask questions, but again, you can always reach out to me and Ryan. And so that being said, this year, what we're trying to focus on for the 8 webinars that we're having in the spring, and we may have more in the summer or fall, but what we wanted to focus on is the new criteria and the new ideas coming out. Whereas we don't have complete guidance, and this is cutting edge, I attribute this to the shift when we moved from spirit to lead. And so my thought is still, we need to get this information out there, and we need to get information into the districts so that you're not surprised when an ECB comes around and it says electrification, and you toss it to the side because it might not apply. There's a lot of change going on, either through laws, through DoD policies or Army policies or so forth, that we're going to need to capture and attack. And I have every faith that some of these things are not going to be difficult, and some of them may be a lot more very difficult. And we'll get into some of those in the webinar series in the upcoming weeks, because the ASHRAE 90.11 will probably have a lot of comments, same as the electrification one. So with that note, I'll kind of open it up to Ryan, Billy. Any other final comments or thoughts?
I'm good. Why don't you mention next week's webinar?
All right, next week's webinar, we're going to be looking at Scope 3 decarbonization pilot projects. The NDAA 2022, National Defense Authorization Act 2022, required us to do a pilot project for the Army. The Navy and Air Force were also required to do that. We will have Dr. Mosier on, and he will be discussing some of the research that they're doing at Erdict and Searle, and how they supported the Seattle design team, and a lot of the information that came out of that. So I'm pretty excited about next week and the upcoming webinar there. And I expect you will have many other questions about that also. So with that, I will just say thank you all for attending, and email me if you have any further questions or thoughts that I did not cover. Thank you.